Good afternoon. I mean, I talk from Israel, so afternoon here. I don't know where everybody is. Some of the faces I recognize. So thank you for attending this last meeting of the lecture series in Baha'i Studies. Last for this academic year, of course. Today we have the privilege of being with Mrs. Joany Lincoln, who is talking to us from joining us from the United States. But before continuing on this the program, I would say that that the whole meeting is being recorded. So if there is anyone who is against being recorded, just I mean they can regrettably they either close their video or whatever, but this is being recorded and then it's being published. I mean, screened on the net. So just for your knowledge, and I would appreciate if people keep their microphones on mute, and when there is a questions and answer session, then of course they can open it up. So
is Elham Afnan on? Because I know she was waiting as well.
yes, she's on. She's on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
So few words about our speaker today. After undergraduate studies in the classical music, Mrs. Lincoln earned master's degree in African ethnomusicology from the University of Abidjan, Ivory Coast. She spent 21 years in French-speaking Africa, the Central African Republic, Cameroon, and the Ivory Coast, followed by 20 years at the Baha'i World Center in Haifa, Israel, during which time she traveled extensively, visiting Baha'i communities in Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, and the Pacific. She has been actively involved in music all her life and maintains a keen interest in chamber music, improvisation, and composition. And today's the title of today's lecture would be, "Is Music a Universal Language?" And we are very keen to hear Joany Lincoln enriching us from her experience in this topic. Floor is yours, Joany.
Well, thank you very much, Soli. It's a pleasure. It's a wonderful pleasure to see Soli again after a number of years. And it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share some thoughts about music with friends in Israel and elsewhere. As has been explained, we lived 20 years from 1993 to 2013 while we were serving at the Baha'i World Center in Israel. And we have many Israeli friends. We miss you quite badly. In particular, I had wonderful chamber music friends in Haifa and in Ein Hod. And my husband had numerous acquaintances and contacts in the government, in Rotary, our neighbors, the contacts of every day. We're very thankful for those times. The subject of today, "Is music a universal language?" is one I have thought about often. It was a phrase I used to hear as a young person. As we pursued our various adventures over the past 5 decades, first in the US, then in Europe, 21 years in Africa, 20 years in Israel, and finally back to the US, I've continued to think about this from a number of different perspectives. Naturally, the ideas gathered and expressed here for the first time are personal opinions. As I wrote in the abstract prepared for this presentation, music speaks to the hearts of all peoples in ways that mere words cannot rival. There's a tremendous variety in the styles of music worldwide, born out of our diverse cultures across the globe. Yet, music of one culture does not necessarily move the hearts of the people of another. As the world continues to shrink into a neighborhood, sometimes these different styles are influencing one another. And as we learn more about one another's music, we can appreciate to a greater degree the diversity of our multicultural world, hopefully drawing closer together in the process. I would first like to share some ideas from the Baha'i writings about the nature and purpose of music itself. This will be followed by some thoughts and stories of various personal musical experiences based on my own training. First, in Western classical music in the US, and then in a very different part of the world, my graduate studies in African ethnomusicology in the Ivory Coast, studying music written by village women. Woven into the hour will be some stories about musical experiences while living in and traveling to a variety of cultures worldwide. As we go along, I think you will see this is not so much of an academic presentation, but rather a sharing of personal thoughts and experiences. Let's start with the nature of music according to the Baha'i writings. For years, I used to wonder why it was that music could affect me so deeply. I started studying classical piano at the age of 5, and that was the beginning of a captivating, lifelong relationship with music. As a young person, I attended 3 different summer music camps and festivals in the US and majored in music at Mills College in Oakland, California. I studied composition both with the well-known French composer Darius Milhaud and with Morton Subotnick, an early pioneer in electronic music back in the 1960s. Music seemed to have the power to affect my moods. Some kinds of music made me happy, others made me feel pensive or reflective. Were other people affected in the same way, even in other cultures? If music actually had the power to affect my state of mind, how, I wondered, did it achieve this? While studying music in the 1960s in California, I became interested in the Baha'i faith and naturally started studying the extensive Baha'i writings, quite astonishing. There were hundreds of volumes written by the founder of the Baha'i faith, his son and great-grandson, between 1863 and 1957. About 100 years of stunning texts with elucidations on just about every subject. And how amazing to later realize how many of these were written right there in Haifa and Akka. Naturally, I was interested and curious to learn what these writings had to say about music. To my surprise, there were entire compilations about the arts and music in particular. As I had previously understood that in certain nations of the Middle East back in the 1800s, music was met with disapproval, if not prohibition, I found this unusual. As we go along, I'll be sharing some of these ideas and quotations. For example, as to the nature and power of music. Music, sung or played, is spiritual food for soul and heart. It moveth the hearts of all who grieve. It permits the listener to be freed from the chains of cares and sorrows. As an illustration of this, the son of the founder of this faith wrote touchingly of his own father's experience. After being banished from Iran to Iraq to Turkey, and finally to the barracks in Akka, referring to this time in Akka, he says, and I quote, "If among the immediate followers there had been those who could have played some musical instrument, i.e. flute or harp, or could have sung, it would have charmed everyone." What I understand from quotes of this nature is that music has the power to uplift, no matter the culture or area of the world, but if so, how does it do it? I found further explanations about the nature of melodies and the effects they can have on the spirit, not only on humans, but on animals. Melodies, though they are material, are connected with the spiritual. Therefore, they produce a great effect. A certain kind of melody makes the spirit happy. Another kind makes it sad. Another excites it to action. All these feelings can be caused by voice and music, for through the nerves, it moves and stirs the spirit. Even over animals, music has effect. For example, when they wish to take a camel over a desert road, they attach to him some bells, or they play upon a flute. This sound prevents him from realizing the fatigue of his journey. His nerves are affected, but he does not have an increase of thought. He feels nothing but physical sensation. And then, voice is nothing but the expression of vibrations, which reaching the tympanum affect the nerves of hearing. Musical melodies are therefore those peculiar effects produced by or from vibration. However, they have the keenest effect upon the spirit. Another interesting concept about the nature and power of music explained how, if it was performed before a discourse or address was to be delivered, it could affect the hearts of the listeners. I quote, "Although music is a material affair, yet its tremendous effect is spiritual, and its greatest attachment is to the realm of the spirit. If a person desires to deliver a discourse, it will prove more effectual after musical melodies." This point is further illustrated in an explanation of how the ancient Greeks, as well as Persian philosophers, were in the habit of delivering their discourses, and about a Persian musician named Barbod. I paraphrase here. First, they would play a few musical melodies, and when the audience attained a certain receptivity, they would leave their instruments and begin the discourse. Whenever there was a great question being placed and pleaded at the court of the king, and the ministry had failed to persuade the king, they would refer the matter to Barbod, a famous musician who would play appropriate and touching music, and the king would be affected by the musical melodies. Feelings of generosity would swell up in his heart, and he would give way. During the 20 years we lived in Israel and attended a number of public gatherings and meetings, I saw this principle in action many times. Often, before the main speaker or presenters would begin, whether in Haifa, Akka, Tel Aviv, or Jerusalem, there was a musical offering of some sort. The effectiveness of using the arts to elevate the spirit and create receptivity was clearly evident. So, having considered a few aspects of the Baha'i view on the nature and power of music in our daily lives, I'd like to move on to the specifics of the question as to whether music qualifies as a universal language. My personal understanding over the years is that what the human race has in common is the fact that music, especially the music to which we are accustomed from the culture of our childhood, reaches right into our souls. It influences our mood, our emotional state. It has the capacity to move us as it travels through the air as these simple vibrations. And when it reaches the tympanum, it affects the nervous system, our hearts, and our souls. And in this way, it's universal. However, having lived in several totally different cultures with diverse races, tribal groups, languages, customs, cultures, food, climate, vegetation, and all the rest, plus traveled to 60 countries or so to visit various Baha'i communities when serving in Haifa, I've also heard many different types of music, seen and experienced firsthand a tremendous diversity of instruments, rhythms, scales, manners of singing, and so forth. You are undoubtedly well aware of this diversity. For example, the bagpipes of Scotland, the didgeridoo of the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the African xylophones and drums, the harps, horns, the oud, shofar, santur, whistles, keyboards, violins, string instruments, so forth. I had a somewhat rude awakening to the fact that we didn't all appreciate or have the same feelings about certain types of music. When once in our earlier years in Africa, one young friend asked me what had I studied. As there were no music schools or even courses in music in the cities in which we lived, in the Central African Republic in the 70s or Cameroon in the 80s, this particular youth was very interested to hear of my studies in music. Oh, what kind of music? He asked. I tried to explain about studying Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, and after a pause, his response was, "Oh, you mean the kind of music that sounds like mosquitoes buzzing in your ears?" Well, I guess he meant the violins, but I didn't say anything. I was basically shocked. Mozart and Bach were nearly sacred to me. So where was I? What did I know about the people among whom I was living? What did I understand of their culture, their music, their feelings? What moved them? I had a similar wake-up call in the Ivory Coast when playing guitar and singing with some of the young people. This time it concerned the development of different kinds of musical talent. At one point, one of the musicians wanted me to accompany him on the guitar, but with quite a complicated rhythmic pattern I found too difficult. He politely asked, "I thought you said you studied music." Well, I had, and I had mostly mastered that difficult rhythm of 3 against 4, as in the Brahms piano pieces, with triplets in one hand and a steady 4 beats in the other. However, these friends could do not only 3 against 4, but 5 against 6 and 7 against 8. I witnessed on more than one occasion dancers entering a circle one after another, each with a different handheld instrument, shakers, bells, shells. Each person introducing an additional rhythm until it was a total composite of extraordinary rhythmic diversity. No way I could do it. I was in total admiration of the skill being demonstrated and the sophistication of their rhythmic talent. As mentioned, across the planet we have different instruments and rhythms, but sometimes also scales and systems and harmonies. And the approaches to singing can also vary considerably from culture to culture. I was surprised to learn sometimes the sound is supposed to be extremely nasal, sometimes just very loud, strong and steady with little nuance, sometimes hugely expressive with great drama, or very precise with a lot of different dynamics according to detailed scores with specific instructions. Naturally, some styles were easier for me to relate to than others. About this time, I discovered another quotation from the Baha'i writings that I found both illuminating and helpful in a practical sense. It explained that music, as we have discussed, is a natural cultural development. Baha'is should thus not be cultivating anything that we would call Baha'i music. We should keep away from any set forms. The quotation explained that this faith is absolutely universal, and what might seem a beautiful addition to the mode of celebrating a holy day in one region would perhaps fall on the ears of people of another country as unpleasant sounds, and vice versa. My personal take is that as we go through life, it's good to try and learn something about each other's cultures. Not just tolerating them, but hopefully learning to actually appreciate them. Sometimes, though, when we don't understand each other's language or music, We can cross lines, even unintentionally. I had an experience once during Ramadan in an open-air market in Francophone West Africa, where there were a number of Muslim gentlemen in spotless long white robes, prayer beads in hand, each one manning his own stall in a reverent manner during this most important fasting period of the year. One was playing the public radio, and what was on that radio? An American rap in English, with the most abrasive lyrics, hugely crass language with sexual undertones. The contradiction struck me as shocking. Such a clash of cultures, styles, motives. What a confusing world. Thank goodness the lyrics were in English, so he didn't know what he was broadcasting from his stand. Interestingly enough, there's a warning in the following text. We have made music a ladder by which souls may ascend to the realm on high. Change it not into wings for self and passion. I guess each of us has a choice to use music as a ladder to ascend the realm on high, or to change it into wings for self and passion. We make these personal choices as individuals and as musicians. For the next few minutes, I wanted to share with you a recording I made a few days ago here at home of some improvised piano. Unfortunately, I have not succeeded in making the piano, with all of its vibration, come across very well over Zoom, thus the pre-recording. I wanted to try and illustrate in a basic way certain aspects of Western music that I personally find can influence our moods and raise our spirits. These are based on the simple components of melody, harmony, and rhythm. So I asked James, who's been helping so much, to put on the piano recording. Thank you. So let's examine together a few of the basic components of music. This is a Western style of music, melody and harmony and rhythm, and just have a bit of an idea of how they can affect the emotions. So if we start with melody, melodies are very powerful little things. I'm just going to play a series of small phrases from different songs, and we can see how they affect us. For example, this. So this is a bit pensive and haunting, a little bit sad. It's quite different than this. Scott Joplin. It's a much more of a feeling of joy. That's dancing, action. My 80-year-old mother used to put on Scott Joplin a lot. When she wanted to dance around the kitchen, she'd say. We have something like this. Dance music, the can-can. Very different feeling. You could play this. Funeral music, again, something quite different. We have modern, atonal, somewhat disjointed sounding music, not in any particular key. Completely different sounds, different feelings that the music itself is bringing out in us. So these little vibrations we were talking about that just go through the air, they hit the tympanum and they make us feel a certain way. So let's move on. There are notes, and this is the harmony. Now we're going to the subject of harmony. Now we have, this is all music students know all about this. So we have major scales, and we change just a few notes, and we've got a minor scale. So one is bright and happy, and the other is definitely more serious, more ponderous, pensive in the minor key. You can hear it really easily when you play Happy Birthday. I'll play first in major and then in minor. Sad birthday, and it was only because I changed the key from major to minor. So when you look at the third, the other chords and things that musicians use, we have something called a leading tone, like a seventh chord. These chords want to resolve. They want to go somewhere. You have a yearning and you don't know why. They can yearn to go down or they can yearn to go up. So this would be... Or you can have a yearning to go up. If you take a simple tune like Dr. Zhivago, you may never have thought about it or realized why it has such an appeal. But listen, there are these little leading tones, half notes in here. Resolved. Resolved. So we have different things like this that are going on in music all the time. This thing of going diminished chords. It's another kind of chord we have, like this. They don't really go anywhere. They don't really resolve. It was the kind of thing that was used a lot in the Charlie Chaplin movies when they had, I guess, chasing scenes. But they have a certain effect on us, and they leave us with a certain way. Now, if you take a few songs, I'm just going to play a couple of my favorites that I always used to love, and until I really analyzed the chords, then I could see why. There was one from the Civil Rights Movement, very, very beautiful song. If you look at Yesterday, I wondered why I like that song, but there's a lift, there's a change of chords that is very surprising to come. There, they also change from major to minor. Listen again. The lift. Over to minor. knows it was Elvis Presley. Now, this part, 3-4 different chords, the same note at the top, but different chords underneath. So if we move on now to rhythm, because we have the complexity of the melodies, and then you have the harmony added onto it, and these different feelings that come about from various combinations. In rhythm, okay, straight walking, 1, 2, 3, 4. Change that just a little bit, and you get 3, a waltz. The introduction of syncopation coming in from Africa, the African American. This is really a huge change. So these syncopations and waltzes and 2 or 3s or 3 or 4s, all of these different kinds of things, when you combine together, you have quite a fantastic sense of the different musical pieces that you can listen to. So what I would like to do is just finish up by saying that there are also certain things that can be done to raise up the intensity of the music. So you might be doing something very quiet, or you might be able to be, for example, change the key. You just keep raising it, like the Brahms lullaby here. To do with expression. The listener is not always aware of what's really happening, but the composer, the musician, has quite an understanding of all these things and knows what kind of feeling they wish to evoke in film music and other kinds of music. And this is all part of the magic and the power of music to affect our emotions and to reach our spirit. Okay. Perhaps over time, I was thinking researchers can study, share, compare what it is in different musical traditions that uplifts people. If they have not already done so, they may well have. But for example, in Chinese music, in the music of circumpolar people, of the Arctic, of the pygmies in Africa, from different parts of India, or the Amazon in Brazil. What is it in each of their musical traditions that really touches their hearts? Is it in their rhythms or their harmonies, their types of phrasing, I don't know. Having considered now some ideas about the nature of music as well as aspects of both its universal qualities and cultural distinctions, I wanted to share a few words about a most fascinating experience I had doing a master's degree back in the early 1990s For years, I had wanted to do some sort of graduate work in music. But living in countries with no music programs, I had had this frustrating, reoccurring dream, which kept coming back over a 15-year period, about how I was unable to fulfill my wish and do graduate study in composition. So by that point, I was really ready to try any kind of graduate studies in music, and I finally found a degree program at l'Institut National des Arts, the National Institute of the Arts, in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. I signed up for this program in African ethnomusicology, knowing very little about the subject, and the dream finally stopped. During those few years, I discovered another aspect of the universality of music. That is, I perceived direct similarities in the way music as a whole was experienced and lived in these African villages, and the way in which I had grown up with it, albeit in a strikingly different culture in the United States and with a very different kind of music. Professor Nyong'Rand-Bois, who ran the program and was my thesis advisor, was a renowned researcher of African drums and drumming. He'd written a book called Drumologie, drumming. We were a class, small, of 7 or 8. All the students and the professors were African males, except for one Frenchman and myself. Our study included courses in semiology, communication through nonverbal systems, drumology, musical anthropology, and different books about African musicology. After about 18 months, when it came time to choose a subject for my thesis, I proposed researching some songs written by women. For example, on women's lives and maternity. I thought that this way, as a mother of 3 and a songwriter and a musician, I would have quite a lot in common with the ladies I would meet, whose songs I would study in spite of our large cultural divide. However, several of my teachers thought that I was unrealistic, even unwise. Firstly, they said, songs belong to the village tradition. They do not come from individuals. But I thought, as a songwriter myself for almost 3 decades, I know something about songs, how they come to life, how they are composed often as a result of personal experiences, motivated by deep personal feelings. Wouldn't it be the same here in the villages? Secondly, they said, you're a white lady, so the people you're interviewing may not trust you. And anyway, you need to give gifts of alcohol or money to the people in the villages, or they won't provide you with any information. Plus, you can speak French, but not the local language. Well, I had a special blessing on my side. A close Baha'i lady friend, Rebecca, had said she would accompany me to the villages and introduce me to 3 generations of her family and friends while helping me with translation. I was quite sure they would talk to the 2 of us and share their stories and songs with us. Eventually, my professors agreed. In the end, as a result of my research, I was able to discover and record 23 songs gathered from 3 generations of village women: the grandmothers, ladies of middle age, and the young women. I later pared down the 23 songs to 12 that I worked with in more detail. The songs came from 3 different villages located about an hour west of the capital of Abidjan: Ngati, Debrimou, and Akradio. As far as the songwriters were concerned, I was amazed to discover that in the same way one could take one's broken sandals to a cobbler in the village and get them repaired, one could also take one's heartfelt stories to a female songwriter. She would listen carefully to the details of your story and within a few days create a personalized song for you. The songs I discovered were thus songs written by women about other women's experiences. The subject on which I was focusing was that of maternity, or in a broad sense, motherhood. And the songs and ceremonies the women chose to share with me then covered topics such as pregnancy, the birth of twins, sterility, the death of children, infidelity, slavery, and other themes. As I had suspected, the genesis and inspiration of the songs was actually personal and autobiographical by nature. And I was able to interview women of 3 generations. Because of that, the songs covered a period of over 100 years, from the mid-1800s until the 1980s. I loved learning about, studying, and writing about those songs, analyzing them musically, comparing their styles, their content, mode of expression, their role in the village life, their contribution to its culture. My studies were unfortunately interrupted for about 6 months by social upheaval in the country. Protest, strikes, the closure of the university. This was not atypical of our 21 years in 3 African countries. But naturally, I was concerned that I might not be able to finish my project. Luckily, things calmed down. I finished, and we had a celebratory luncheon at our home. We hired a bus to bring some of the women from the 3 villages into the capital and invited my professors and fellow students. The women sang for us, and it was a joyous affair. Just briefly, due to lack of time, I would like to share with you the following 4 points I extracted from the thesis recently, illustrating why or how I found their musical experience in the village similar to my own experience growing up with music in the United States. Firstly, musically speaking, it was clear from comparing the songs of the grandmothers, the middle-aged ladies, and the younger women that the musical styles changed as the decades went by. Their songs evolved over the years from the style called Selu to the alifret style to solo and to the aminda style, popular at that time among the younger women. This situation was very familiar to me, similar to the way the style of popular music in the time of my grandmother was different from that of my mother, which differed from the music of my younger years. We transitioned through the musical styles of such as Cole Porter, a young Louis Armstrong, Bessie Smith, Duke Ellington, on to Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, big bands, Elvis Presley, Beatles, rap, and so forth, etc., etc. Over time, the styles in both cultures seem to have not only changed, but also to have shifted, musically speaking, from a more formalistic to a less constrained style. Secondly, historically speaking, the subject matter of the text and lyrics changed, reflecting the events of the times. The village songs addressed subjects that the women felt passionately about at a given time in history, from a very early song about slavery to a later one about the suffering of their loved ones who were obliged to build railroads for the French colonizers, to the more modern daily challenges of women struggling for greater equality in village life. This was very similar to the different portrayals of periods of history found in American musical folklore. Songs from the period of slavery, those from the time of World War II, songs protesting the Vietnam War, songs about the civil rights movement, the struggle for women's independence, and so forth. Thirdly, sociologically speaking, over the decades, there was a shift in the manner in which the village women expressed themselves. That is, their self-expression developed and expanded. As time went by, they were less shy, their language was bolder. They became more outspoken in their protests about the men who had deserted their children and themselves, about their desire for more independence. Again, similar to the development and increase over the decades of the self-expression of women in the US and other areas of the world. Finally, psychologically speaking, these songs were a means of expressing poignant and profound emotions in a way that mere words could not rival. The pith of a woman's pain over the loss of a baby, over a man leaving her for another woman, the depth of her sorrow because of her infertility, or her joy at having twins. All of this came across through song. I could immediately relate this capacity of songs to express deep feelings to similar experiences I had had in the US, to my own songwriting. Songs can transport pain and profound emotions into a shared experience so that others can empathize, and appreciate them, can even participate in the singing of the songs. As John Steinbeck has written, and I quote, "Songs are the history of a people. You can learn more about people in listening to their songs than by any other manner, because in the songs is the expression of all the hopes, the wounds, the anger, the fears, the needs, and the wishes of people." In a word, the culture of the village was changing, evolving, and similar to other cultures around the world, that evolution was being reflected in their music. All in all, that program was quite demanding, as it required not only the 18 months of study followed by field research, but we also had to produce brief videos about the actual research process and provide written scores for each of the songs we'd researched. In the end, my own thesis ended up being 191 pages long and in French. Luckily, my husband, whom some of you may remember for his Hebrew, helped me enormously with the French, and it seems my professor found it intelligible. An interesting sequel to this story is that during a visit back to Boston, just after having turned in the thesis, I was able to make an appointment with the woman who was at that time the director of Harvard's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. I wanted to find out if there were other kinds of research projects going on about music by women in Africa. She received me graciously, was very inquisitive about the study, and then asked me if I knew I was on the cutting edge of ethnomusicology studies worldwide, that there were a few similar studies of which she was aware. She said the work I had done was more like what is required for a PhD in the United States, and asked for a copy for the Harvard Library. End of saga. All in all, as I mentioned earlier, a fascinating and very unique experience. As we approach the end of our hour, I wanted to mention a few last points about music's potential role as an educator and a unifier. Let's consider first music as an educator of adults as well as of children. While living in the Ivory Coast, I had an experience that brought home to me the role music can play as an educational tool. During the time of the Liberian Civil War in the early 1990s, several friends accompanied me on a long car journey across the country to the Liberian border. Entire villages of Baha'is had fled the fighting and come across into the Ivory Coast. We drove out there basically to welcome and encourage them after the horrors they had endured: death of family members, destruction, rape, the burning of their villages, etc. At one point, during our visit, they asked me to tell them stories about Baha'i history, which I attempted to do. I was in the middle of telling them of the suffering of the founder of the Baha'i faith, how he had been thrown into a terrible underground prison in Tehran called the Black Pit, when the meeting was totally disrupted by commotion. People jumped up. They started dancing and singing and playing drums and moving around in a big circle where we'd been sitting. I asked my translator if I'd said something wrong. He explained, no. They had simply been so moved by the story that they had instantly translated the account of the Black Pit into song and dance. Later, I told a second story about the red roan horse, and the same thing happened. I was struck by how carefully they had been listening, so absorbed, how totally they had been taken the story to heart, quickly internalized and assimilated its essence, translated it into their local language, and from there into music and dance. Such a vivid example of how music can help people to first internalize concepts and then express themselves and draw the community closer together through song and dance. Turning to music as an educator of children, I find the following concepts both meaningful and instructive. Quoting again from the Baha'i writings, music has wonderful sway and effect in the hearts of children, for their hearts are pure and melodies have great influence in them. The latent talents with which the hearts of these children are endowed will find expression through the medium of music. Likewise, it is necessary that the schools teach it in order that the souls and hearts of the pupils may become vivified and exhilarated, and their lives be brightened with enjoyment. Once, when visiting communities in the Democratic Republic of Congo, I attended a weekend gathering in Bukavu, in the war-torn area of South Kivu, on the border with Rwanda. At one point in the program, the children and young adolescents came to sing for us. They performed a string of lively songs. The texts were from the Baha'i writings and messages that had recently come from the Baha'i World Center in Haifa about the restoration of the golden dome of the shrine of the Bab. They had obviously internalized and memorized these texts while putting them to music. As they swayed and danced, moving from song to song about hope and promise for the future, the music, drumming, singing, and spirit in that room were overpowering. At the same time, their own region was being harassed by rivaling rebel groups, and UN troops were present, trying to quell the violence. These young adolescents were singing quotations and about how to bring diverse peoples together. Turning to music as a unifier, when I was traveling in the interior of Papua New Guinea, the island nation to the north of Australia, I attended a gathering that drew people together who had hiked in for days through steep mountains and valleys, or who had taken long boat rides from one island port to another. Naturally, they arrived exhausted. On the opening day of our conference, the organizing committee had us begin with song, one song after another, in stunning four-part harmony, poured out of the exhausted but elated participants from totally different tribal backgrounds, including people who had come from surrounding island countries such as the Solomon Islands. A deep sharing of the soul was going on. Music was breaking down the barriers of fatigue while drawing everyone together. When it was my turn to speak as the invited guest, having been moved to tears by their songs, words escaped me. It seemed more fitting to sing, so I stood and sang, and I shared some of the beautiful songs I'd learned in Africa, explaining that their brothers and sisters on the other side of the world were experiencing similar emotions and expressing them in similar ways. Eventually, we transitioned into the items on the agenda and topics for discussion. I've seen this happen again and again as people are brought together and are able to share through artistic expression. Another time, just a few years ago, I participated in a large gathering in Chile for the dedication of a Baha'i house of worship. I was singing in a choir composed of individuals from all over the Latin American continent. It has since occurred to me that 100 years ago, one could not have imagined such a thing would be possible. But there we were, united through the arts, the descendants of the Spanish and Portuguese colonizers, native indigenous peoples, descendants of African slaves, friends from the jungles of the Amazon. In addition to singing together, tribal dances and theater pieces were shared as well. Hearts were warmed, spirits uplifted, differences faded into the background. They didn't matter so much anymore. Souls were communicating. The last aspect I wanted to mention about music as a unifier is that sometimes people from totally diverse cultural, political, or religious backgrounds can come together, and if they share the skill of playing the same kind of music, it will draw them closer. For example, in chamber music. Chamber music is such an intimate experience, given that there are only a small number of musicians involved, and that they often play deeply moving scores. For me, it has been mostly gorgeous piano duos, trios, quartets, and quintets. Together, the small group is obliged to figure out how to best play that piece. Even if you're strangers, you need to work out who in different passages of the score has the melody, who should be quieter, who should be in a supportive role, and then how together do we build a particular transition to a climax. No one dominates. It's the ensemble that counts. For me, it is similar to a process of consultation, when people consider diverse points of view and then make decisions together. In chamber music, decisions are made about passing themes back and forth, about how to express different phrases, and most importantly, each one tries to keep the ego, the insistent self, under control in order to produce something greater than the individual parts. Unity is built. Perhaps some of you have read one of the books on this subject, Indivisible by Four, it's called, by Arnold Steinhardt, about the Guarneri string quartet. I always also remember the comment of Daniel Barenboim. In music, you learn to express yourself while listening to what others are saying. It's a school for life, a school for understanding the point of view of the other and adjusting yours. So beautifully stated. In conclusion, it's clear that music is universal in its ability to stir hearts, to free us from chains of cares and sorrows, to stir our deeper emotions, to educate, to unite. And as we've noted, it is not the same music that produces these effects in every culture. At the same time, our diversity of cultures can enrich one another. Consider, for example, how the American musical culture has been enriched by African and Latin American influences. The contribution of the African American population to music in the United States is enormous. From the time when the slaves brought the rhythms of their African cultures to America and poured their very souls into their music because of the depth of their suffering. The spirituals, later the ragtime, the blues, jazz, other genres, both popular and classical, all play an integral, indispensable part in the development of America's rich musical heritage. All of these factors assist us as we continue on our journey of learning more about each other's music and hopefully drawing closer in the process. So thank you, Soli, for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. It's been a pleasure for me to think back actually over these different components of my own musical education, including the research in the Ivory Coast, and to realize how much that education has just continued on for decades afterwards, with travel and involvement in a diversity of cultures. And thank you, friends, for listening.
Thank you very much, Joany. It was an excellent lecture through which you took us to the different variations of music, different kinds, and shared your experiences with us. That was great. And if you come by a certain kind of music that could be exchange the music that we have here in the recent days, so it will be a very good welcome. Anyway, I wanted to suggest, before we go to the question part, I wanted to suggest whether you are aware that in Harvard University, which you mentioned, there is a program. It might have started from your meeting. I'm not sure. You have to look at it up. But there is actually what they call Harvard Music Lab, and they have I think the guy there is Samuel Mehr, M-E-H-R.
Okay.
And he is responsible for research that has been completed, I think, last year or in 2019 or 2020, that they have collected exactly what you have, what you told us here. They went through the whole of archives, different archives in the States, abroad. They made a lot of recordings. So I think your experience and what you have described here and your thesis, I think you should consider maybe turning to them and see maybe there is I can send you something if you are interested. It's but if you look at it on the Google, Samuel Mehr, you would see it. It's I thought it's very I would say intersecting your interest.
Soli, thank you so much. I will try and do that actually, because
Yes.
you have because of this talk, I've gotten quite interested in some things I did before, and there's a lot there. There's so much there that could help the world. Oh my Lord!
Yeah, it's on the East Coast as well, so it's near you.
It's not far at all. No.
No. Okay, we are happy to open the screen, I would say, for not the floor, the screen for questions. So please, is there any questions to present to Joany? Probably they want to hear you more with the music part, other than ask questions.
Oh, God.
Yes, Ollie Hansen, please.
I can type my question.
Oh, was the music designed to be sung by an individual or by the group? The songs that I studied. Oh, yeah. This was group singing, but there were solos weaved in and out of there. And the fascinating thing is how those styles changed also. Even some of the men that I interviewed and talked to, they said, well, at first the women were only allowed to sing when the men would beat the drums. And then the women of the younger group, the Aminda, they were all decided to just kind of clap. They were going to make their own rhythm. They didn't care. So that's what I mean by the fact that so many of these different things all tied in together with the fact that the cultures were changing. And exactly the same way that cultures were changing in other areas of the world. So, all of these factors are just uniting factors. It's just we don't always know what's going on, I think. Does that answer your question, Holly? Yes, no. We can understand yes and no. Yes, but even though the culture was changing, the music was still collective. Oh, yeah, yeah. And what I've learned also, just because of living in Africa, in Cameroon, there are 200 local languages. There's so many different tribal groups, and every area of the country has its own kind of music, even sometimes its own instruments. So this business of pulling ourselves together, of appreciating one another rather than conflicting with another, just because we're different, I don't know, but this is just my own thinking and what I learned over the years. So.
Well, I see Annette Samuels has written here, we need an Arab-Jewish peace to help solve our problems here. I wish it was as simple as that, just to write a song. And we have actually on the same floor, we have the Arab Jewish Center.
Yeah,
And
she did.
it's,
Yeah, yeah, you
the,
did.
the Arab lady that lives, that works at the center, for the last 2 days, she didn't appear. I assume this is part of the tension that goes here. It's so deep that even she probably was afraid to come to the university for some,
Oh,
I
Lord.
guess. So,
Yeah.
any other questions, please, or comments?
I had a question. I raised my hand, but
Yes,
I'm not sure.
Dr. May
Yeah,
Farid.
I wanted to thank Mrs.
Joany.
Lincoln for the really
Thank you.
fascinating presentation. I was also curious about the field research and specifically about, you know, how like the question of ownership of this type of music comes in. So I remember in China, when I was in China, I was, you know, doing research, field research, and I interviewed an NGO that was also collecting folk music from some of the ethnic minority regions to try to preserve, you know, local language and pass it down to the later generations. And as they were recording and selling this, you know, music in different ways, you know, they ran against this problem of, well, who owns this music? And, you know, so for example, the examples you gave, you know, were these songs that were created by these women, where they seem to belong, you know, or be authored by, you know, by the women or by those who were helping put the experiences into music, or by the community as a whole?
You know, each one of these songs, each one of these songs was written by one individual woman who went to see the musical lady. And the musical lady, the one who wrote the songs, she would put their name in the song, and she would also put the generations of the families from which that lady came. I mean, the whole thing was historically extremely interesting to me. I think we were just there was no question yet of money or of contracts or anything. I think I was sort of maybe before that. And these songs were not to be commercialized in any way. The women knew that. But I was told that you know, remember my professors told me that I had to take alcohol or money and pay people. Well, Baha'is don't drink, so that was going to be a problem. And then I wasn't going to pay, but I ended up taking huge bags of 60 kilos of rice and all kinds of bottles of oil. That's just my part. Whatever I could do to thank these ladies, because they had shared things lady to lady, you know, friends to friends. This was life. I can see how that would be very much of a difficulty, the commercial issue. It's sort of the same thing of people returning African artifacts now back to the countries where they or from which they originally came and all that. I mean, the world is going through some necessary complications as we shrink into a neighborhood.
I'd like to say something.
Sure.
Tamar!
Hi.
Tamar Samuels, please.
So, first of all, thank you. It's really good to see you, and it was really, really interesting. And I just wanted to say that I really connect to the things you mentioned because I'm a music therapist, and the fact that music can help people express themselves and make them feel in a certain way. And so that's really a wonderful part of music. And also I want to mention that I do a group of mothers and toddlers in music and movement. So it's using the music for the connection between the mother and the child. So anyway, it was really interesting, and it's wonderful to hear you.
Wow. Well, just for the benefit of the rest of you, Tamar Samuels is the daughter of Annette, the lady who put the remarks. Annette is from Einhard, and Tamara, I can't remember. Tamara, where you live? You live out
in Ichmanim in the Galilee.
In the Galilee, absolutely. And Annette was the lady, I owe my life to Annette. I played music with her for 18 years. A fabulous violinist. So, you know, this was all from another undercurrent of my 20 years in Israel, but unforgettable. And
Annette is here as well.
What?
Annette is here as well.
Yes, Annette was the one who said that we need a Jewish what, a Jewish Arabic piece or something.
Yes.
Yeah, and the Samuels family is very, very talented musically, and my goodness, what wonderful times, you know, and also just to carry us through so many different things. It was the same in Africa. So many. We lived through revolutions and horrible things. Our kids got kicked out of school and chairs got thrown out of the windows and this and that and everything. But you've got to have things to hold you together because humanity's got difficult times to go through, and music is definitely one of them. There are people here like Royaline Edwards sitting there, and oh my goodness, another wonderful musician lives just across the river from me. But my Lord, what this woman has done for the children in the area. Tamar, you and Royaline should communicate. Royaline wrote musicals for white children all around because Portsmouth and New Hampshire were a bit white up here. And so she was teaching in the schools and wrote these marvelous musicals for children in the schools that taught them all about the important African American heroes of the last, I don't know, 50 years or something. And so she wrote the music and she created the plays. And I mean, what can be done? A lot can be done from the grassroots, just with the normal talents that everybody on these screens has.
Hello,
Thank you very much.
Joany. I had to say something. You made me have to, I was not going to say anything. I tried to write it in the chat, go to the chat room. But thank you so much. I really did enjoy this. I absolutely, especially your playing. You know, I consider you as always my music teacher.
That's what she says. But do you know this lady? I met her because she came to something at the Baha'i Greenacre School. She's not a Baha'i. She came over and there was a piano. I started playing something and she starts playing totally by ear. She played an F sharp major. For anybody who knows anything about music, I almost died. And she just goes ahead and rattles off whatever she wants. And then she calls me her teacher.
It was wonderful.
Do we have other questions? Thanks again. Thank you very much for everyone, and see you in our next academic year's first lecture. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joany. Thank you very much for the interesting lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you.
And my regards to Albert and Joshua and the family.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you very
much.
much. Hope
And
to
all
see
the
you here.
best for you. We're thinking about you, believe me.
Thank you. Hope to see you here.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.